Imagine this. A young TV anchor dressed for work before sunrise walks into her apartment parking lot. Minutes later, she's gone. All that's left behind are her car keys bent in the door, a single red high heel on the ground, and muffled screams neighbors swore they heard in the dark. To this day, her body has never been found. And the most terrifying part? Her killer is almost certainly still alive, walking free. Who was waiting in that parking lot? And why has no one spoken the truth in over 30 years? Because somewhere out there, someone knows exactly what happened to Jodi Huisentruit. Before we dive deeper, hit subscribe for more vanished and chilling mysteries. Jodi was a bright thing, a morning person in a town that woke up to her voice. Jodi Huisentruit sold weather and headlines with the confidence of someone who had learned early how to step into light and be seen. She wore red heels on television and laughed easily between takes. And when she leaned into the camera, the whole room leaned with her. In a place like Mason City, Iowa, where people recognized one another at the grocery store, a local TV anchor is not only a face on the screen. She is a neighbor, a fixture, a small public magic. That is why in June of 1995, when Jodi did not show up for the morning show and her smell of coffee and hairspray could not be found anywhere, the city woke up to a hole shaped like someone beloved, and then to a fear that would not close. The day before she disappeared, Jodi had been ordinary in every small, human way. She'd spent an afternoon playing in a golf tournament, joked with coworkers, and accepted an invitation to see a homemade tape prepared in her honor. She was 27, precise in her routines, but late for life in the ways every person is: ambitious, hopeful, quietly restless. That night she went to bed and set an alarm like always. The next morning she overslept. She called the station, then called again. She told a producer she would be there shortly. And then she vanished between the glow of the streetlights and the day's first news. At first, the world assumed explanations that make most vanishings easier to bear: traffic, illness, a detour. But those explanations fell away like old paint-the-moment police reached Jodi's apartment complex. The scene in the parking lot read like a flinch. A red Mazda Miata she had been planning to buy sat where it had been left, its promise unfinished. Nearby, there were personal effects strewn as though a human life had been caught half-stepped. Her bent car key, a blow dryer, a single red high heel lying as if cast from a flight of panic. Police found what appeared to be the physical trace of a struggle: scuff marks, dislodged items, and a palm print that did not belong to anyone in her immediate circle. Neighbors would later tell investigators they had heard screams in the early morning hours. One witness remembered a white van idling in the lot, an ordinary vehicle that in that moment looked monstrous. These things combined to tell an ugly truth nobody wanted to admit. This was not a disappearance the calendar could explain. This was an abduction. The world of news moves fast. The world of police moves methodically. The two collided in a frenzy of flashbulbs, interviews, and questions nobody could answer. Mason City police were flooded with tips, hundreds, then thousands, spurred by television appearances, anonymous calls, and the raw, greedy hunger of a public that cannot let a story like this go. Jodi's family and friends watched strangers spin theories on live television. They watched psychics and private investigators mount searches that would make headlines, but produce no body, no confession, no proof. Volunteers combed woods, farmers peered through ditches, and the hush of the county night was broken by the strange, bright business of looking. Yet despite thousands of interviews and searches, the single simple truth, the where of Jodi, remained undetermined. There were people the case circled like satellites: friends, acquaintances, those who had been the last to see her, those whose stories fit and then faltered. Among them was a man named John Vancis, who had spent time with Jodi the evening before she disappeared and was, for a while, the focus of intense scrutiny. He cooperated with investigators, giving DNA and prints, answering questions made into long, slow examinations. He was never charged. Decades of interviews and tests did not yield enough to indict. Public attention given to his connection to Jodi never became prosecution, and he maintained his innocence. He died in 2024 before the case was solved. The distinction is crucial and small. The law demands evidence. Grief demands closure. The difference left both unsettled. Investigators recorded details that still make the jaw tighten. An idling white Ford Econoline seen in the lot around the time neighbors said they heard screams. The bent keys and single heel. An unidentified palm print on a pole. A white van in a sleepy town at dawn should be unremarkable. When memory and time are pressed hard by fear, ordinary objects become anchors of terror. That palm print, the neighbor's scream, the absence of a body. These became the case's pillars. Nothing could be built solidly on them. And yet they bore the full weight of suspicion and sorrow. Police kept the evidence, submitted what they could to labs, sent DNA where it might be compared against the ever-growing databases of the future. Each technological advance in the years afterward rekindled hope. Newer tests, better databases, the possibility that modern science could see what 1995 could not. Each advance, however, also allowed for a new kind of frustration. Hints that almost fit and might someday hook the truth. In the first weeks, television cameras that had once framed Jodie's smile framed her absence. Her co-workers held on to the routines of on-air life, but the skeleton of the morning show felt different, an echo of normalcy where her place had been. The small acts of human certainty, announcing the weather, previewing the headlines, carried the weight of a life that had been interrupted. Her family worked with private investigators, traveled to conferences, and agreed to appear on programs that promised leads. They could not know, then, that time would eventually become its own kind of cruelty. As the years spread, hope hardened in some places and softened in others. Friends retold their last conversations with her in ways that made them sound like confessions. Small things that now seemed like omens, because absence hunts memory and embellishes it. The official investigation never slept entirely. Detectives came and went. Cold case teams circled back with new technologies, new eyes, and the same old files. There were theories that read like television plots. Random abduction, targeted attack, a jealous lover, a stranger in a van. But none fit the evidence in a way that held up to scrutiny. Psychics and television personalities offered colorful maps of where she might be. Private investigators produced timelines and hypotheses. Each claim drew momentary attention and then receded into the long, patient work of police. Some leads sent searchers into cornfields for days. Others drew investigators to properties, to garages, to names that carried the aura of threat. Nothing concrete came from these pushes. No excavation unearthed a body. No confession trembled into a taped admission. Time did not make the feeling of being watched subside for those who loved Jodie. Instead, it calcified. Her family kept a website, findjodie.com, an attempt to convert grief into a sustained search. The site served as archive, as rallying point, and as a plea. Do not forget her. For the people in Mason City, she became a ghost that refused to be entirely unseen. Every neighbor who had heard a scream, every driver who had remembered a white van, every person who saw a woman who might be Jodie at a gas station in the years after drew a line between past memory and present possibility. Some sightings were credible enough to warrant police attention. Most were not. Still, each one pulled the calendar back to that terrible morning and reopened wound. Investigative patience is not the same as lack of urgency. It is methodical, sourly determined. Files piled up. New methodologies were applied to old evidence. Forensic labs improved their capacity to analyze trace materials. Databases grew and began to stitch together information that had previously been isolated. Detectives re-interviewed sources, checked alibis with modern precision, and used technology to map movements across years. Yet the case resisted the tools built to solve it. It became, in the parlance of law enforcement and the media, a cold case. But cold rarely means static. In 2001, Jodie was legally declared dead, a formal decision that allowed the family to settle affairs and yet did nothing to produce the body or the truth. The declaration was both a legal closure and an emotional cliff. It enabled certain practicalities while insisting painfully on an uncertainty that would never feel final. Stories like this breed stories. Over time, a pattern of rumor and suspicion took shape that the public could taste even if it could not prove. Men who'd been too interested in a young anchor, ex-husbands and estranged lovers, the odd note, the wrong look. A documentary, released decades later, would bring some of those threads back into public view, examining interviews and newly surfaced testimony. The documentary introduced names that had not been widely discussed before and highlighted a man, Brad Miliband, tied by marriage to Jodi Circle, whose behavior some described as oddly fixated. He had been associated with a white van in the years near the disappearance, and his resemblance to a previously circulated sketch raised questions. He denied involvement and cooperated with investigators when approached. Documentary filmmakers, operating in the space between journalism and storytelling, sifted archived interviews and new statements for patterns, and their work reminded a new generation that the case was not a ghost tale, but one of real consequence. Where the film suggested possible paths, the investigation moved carefully, legally. No charges, no convictions, only questions that demanded evidence before they could name a perpetrator. Public obsession and police obligation do not always align kindly. The internet and forums gave a home to armchair detectives who stitched together timelines and mapped supposed connections. Journalists dug into court records, relationships, and old interviews. Friends and family pushed for renewed attention when any new lead surfaced. The difficulty in this case has always been the difference between suspicion and proof. People can look like the sketch, can have access to similar vehicles, can be odd or unpleasant in description, but the court system requires something more than resemblance or rumor. That more, DNA, a confession, a witness, has not come. So the files keep accumulating additive details that look like progress, and too often get reduced to a list of might-have-beens. There are theories that refuse to die because they make narrative sense. Abduction by someone who watched her, someone who learned her schedule and seized an early morning when the city still slept. An attack by a person whose life was quiet and cruel in the wrong ways. A domestic conflict that escalated catastrophically. Each is possible. Each is also speculative. The police publicly have said they believe she was abducted from the parking lot after an apparent struggle. They have continued to encourage tips and to treat the case as active, allowing that someday someone who knows something, anything, might decide to tell what they know. That's the one true avenue left. For memory to crack or for conscience to edge forward enough to move the case from the cold file to a courtroom or a grave. Geography matters in mysteries. Mason City sits amidst Iowa's flat, honest land, where culverts and back roads could hide anything if someone wanted them to. An abductor could leave town in minutes. Bodies can be buried in places that no one walks and forgotten. Yet geography is also witness. Roads have tolls of people who see, of gas stations with cameras, of towns where someone remembers a strange car pulling in and staying. That is why history was rechecked, why private investigators and police scoured not only the immediate parking lot, but those routes that could have led a victim away from the city's line. Where the evidence faded was where the world turned from urgency to ache. There was no piece that slotted cleanly into place and made the puzzle solve itself. For Jodi's parents and those who loved her, time is measured not in years, but in the space of birthdays she will not attend and the small, ordinary rituals she will not perform. They have kept their daughter's image alive in small, rigorous ways. Websites, interviews that read like letters to someone who might be listening. The family's grief has been translated into the work of keeping the story in the public eye, urging authorities to keep investigating, and refusing to let a local anchor, someone who had given a town mornings for years, be reduced to a cold statistic. That refusal is a kind of love that refuses the bones of bureaucracy and insists on memory as action. If there is a cruelty to cold cases, it is this. A life disappears, and those left behind must construct meaning from absence. They do so with festivals, with vigils, with banners, with interviews that might stir new memory. They also do so with the more unbearable work of waiting for a phone call that names a place, a detail, a grave. The case has been reopened in public, reviewed, re-examined, and revisited in press packages and podcasts. Each re-examination has the power to create one of two things: a breakthrough or a long, new ache. The unpredictability of which will arrive keeps the relatives awake. There have been moments when the world seemed on the brink of an answer. New documentaries, renewed police attention, the death of one who had known things. Each development teased an inference. But teasing is not closure. Those who study cold cases know the long, delicate arithmetic of evidence. A confession without corroboration cannot stand. A footprint without a body can be dismissed. A witness who changes their story can be unreliable. The work of the investigator is glacial by design, because to rush a case is to risk convicting the wrong person or letting the right criminal escape. Justice moves in small, often frustrating increments, and insists on proof. In Jodie's case, the increments have not converged into the final step. When I imagine the last minutes before dawn on June 27, 1995, the streetlights yawning, the sound of distant traffic like a throat clearing, I imagine someone full of plans, stepping from porch light into a small private cold. And then the human mind seeks closure, a rounded explanation with cause and consequence. But sometimes life produces a jagged edge that will not be sanded down. In those jagged spaces, the people left behind must do the work of memorial, of investigation, and of insisting that missing is not an acceptable end. They keep the missing person's name in the mouth of the living. They file reports, answer interviews, and watch as the world gradually changes the context of the case, from a local tragedy to a national curiosity and back again. There are practical things, too, evidence that might someday be the hinge of a case. DNA technology keeps improving. Databases keep expanding. A partial print taken from that parking lot pole might someday match a name in a file. A confession recorded quietly by someone who could not carry their secret any longer might arrive. Or a piece of physical evidence, incorrectly cataloged or overlooked, might be re-examined and, with a new technique, reveal a fingerprint or DNA. It sounds almost too simple to be the solution for a life gone missing. But in too many cold cases, the one small, precise detail is what finally tips a case from impossible to prosecutable. Investigators continue to believe that something like that is possible. This is not a story with a tidy ending. It is not a detective novel where clues add up neatly and the suspect confesses in the final chapter. It is, rather, the kind of story that lives in the long gap between what was and what should have been. A woman who went to work and did not come home. The facts we have: her last phone call, the commute she never completed, personal items abandoned in the dark, a neighbor's scream, a white van idling in the lot, are bones of a narrative that will not speak fully until someone adds the connective tissue of evidence. Until then, those bones remain cold and visible, a silhouette against a morning that forgot to keep one of its own. In Mason City, the coffee shop still opens. The morning show has new faces. People who once watched Jodi are older now. Her mother and father are older in ways time always does to parents who outlive a child's presence. They keep going because the world keeps asking them to. And in the quiet hours, those hours when television stops pretending to be transient and becomes something like a shrine, they hope. They hope for a phone call that names a place. They hope for the day someone will pull them aside and say, "Finally, we found something." Until then, the city of Mason waits with them, and the memory of a woman in red heels, courageous and alive on the screen, stays stubbornly, incandescently present. If you take anything from this, let it be this: a missing person is not a plot device. Jodi Huisentruit was a person with friends and family and routines and plans. The facts of what happened that morning remain unresolved, and the case stands as both a challenge to criminal justice and a wound in the community. Investigators remain open to tips, aware that the smallest memory, who saw a white van, who noticed unusual activity on a certain morning, might be the thread that unravels the whole thing. For now, we keep looking, because looking is the kind of small heroism that refuses to let a life be erased. If you remember anything, no matter how small or how long ago, call Mason City Police or the Iowa Missing Person Clearinghouse. Names and faces deserve more than rumor. They deserve the long work of truth. Jodi's story is still being written by those who remember her and by those who refuse to accept silence as an answer. The light of a morning anchor's smile still reflects off the glass of a town she woke. Toward that light the search continues. The deeper investigators dug into Jodi Huisentruit's disappearance, the darker the questions became. The first days of shock had passed. The local press had carried their headlines, but the silence left behind was not neutral. It was suffocating. The public wanted an arrest, a name, a body. They wanted something more than scattered possessions on the ground. But time ticked forward, and in that time, suspicion metastasized. Behind closed doors, detectives struggled with what they could not yet prove. They had theories, and those theories pointed to people who had moved within Jodi's orbit. The last man to see her, the man who played her a homemade videotape of her golf tournament only hours before she vanished, John Vancis, remained at the center of unrelenting speculation. He had been close to Jodi, far closer than most. He called her like a daughter, but others whispered about his fixation, his jealousy when she spent time with younger men. The day after she disappeared, Vancis reportedly told a friend, "I was the last one to see her alive." For years, that sentence rang like a bell. Was it grief or guilt? Police interrogated him, searched his home, and even brought cadaver dogs. Yet without a body, without blood, without DNA, the law could not stretch that far. Vancis eventually left Iowa, carrying the weight of suspicion that followed him until his death in 2024. Suspicion that never once hardened into charges. Still, the whispers clung. The very idea that Jodi's abductor might not have been a stranger, but someone she trusted, was more terrifying than any white van in the dark. As the years wore on, her case became legend. Journalists, documentary makers, podcasters, amateur sleuths, all circled back to the same morning, the same haunting details. That single red shoe, the bent car key, found still in the lock as if twisted by a trembling hand. Neighbors hearing muffled screams before dawn. A witness catching the shape of a van, faceless in the dark. The way her blow dryer lay abandoned, as though ripped from her bag in the chaos. These were the fragments that told the story of violence, but not the story's end. For her family, that lack of an ending was the cruelest torture. Jodi's mother, Imogene, once said that every time the phone rang she prayed it was her daughter, alive, calling after all those years. Instead, the calls were tips, rumors, or reporters chasing fresh angles. The Huisentruit family had to live not only with grief, but with performance. Interviews, press conferences, candlelight vigils, standing at podiums while cameras blinked, begging for answers that never came. The world did not stop turning. Mason City moved on, but her apartment complex, the Key Apartments, still stood like a scar. Residents whispered about the parking lot, about the pole where the palm print was found. The palm print that, to this day, belongs to no one. That small trace became almost mythic, the only known touch of the monster who took her. Then came the years of reinvestigation. Detectives re-examined old files with new technology. Cold case experts sifted through reports with eyes that hadn't been blinded by the hysteria of 1995. There were new suspects, new angles. A name surfaced. A man connected by marriage to Jodi's social circle. A man with a troubling history and ties to a white van. Some said he resembled the sketch released after her abduction. The theory burned briefly in the media before sputtering. No charges, no proof. Just another layer of suspicion in a case already collapsing under the weight of it. And so the mystery endured. What makes Jodi's story so chilling is not just the violence of that morning, but the idea that the truth is already known. Somewhere, someone carries the secret like a stone in their chest. They know what happened in those minutes between her apartment door and her car. They know where her body lies. They know why. The FBI and Mason City Police have repeated the same message for years. Someone out there knows. It is not a platitude. It is fact. Abductions do not happen in silence. Someone saw her that morning. Someone drove away from that lot with her inside. Someone buried her. Someone talked, even if only once, even if only in a moment of weakness. Yet if that word was ever spoken, it has never reached investigators in a form strong enough to shatter the case open. By the 25th anniversary of her disappearance, Mason City gathered for a vigil. Friends, neighbors, and co-workers lit candles and spoke her name. The local TV station played clips of her smiling face, her weather reports, her laugh. It was supposed to be comforting, but the truth was stark. A quarter of a century had passed, and nothing had changed. She was still gone. The case was still unsolved. Time had become its own crime. The vigil was not only a memorial, it was a warning. If a young anchor could vanish from her own parking lot under streetlights in the heart of town, what did that say about safety, about the illusion of ordinary life? It meant no one was untouchable. It meant danger could be watching even when you felt most routine, most invincible. Today, the case is still open. The files still sit in police custody, worn and heavy. Evidence has been reprocessed with modern forensic tools. DNA is stored, waiting for a match that may yet appear. Investigators insist they are closer than ever. Yet the silence remains. And perhaps the most horrifying thought is this: Jodie's killer is very likely still alive. Perhaps they are an old man now, living quietly, watching the world forget. Perhaps they smile at the fact that they got away with it. Or perhaps they wake in the night sweating, haunted by the sound of her scream, by the scrape of her car key against metal, by the sight of her shoe lying on asphalt. Someone is carrying that memory, and it is poison. For Mason City, the case is no longer just about Jodie. It is about the wound it left behind. A wound in trust, in community, in the belief that safety could be taken for granted. When she disappeared, Mason City lost more than a news anchor. It lost the illusion that life could be ordinary. And for the world, Jodi Huisentruit's disappearance remains one of the most haunting cold cases in America. A story of ambition cut short, of a young woman stolen from the morning light, of evidence that screams of violence but refuses to name the monster who caused it. The final chilling truth is this: Jodie's life did not simply vanish. It was taken violently by someone who planned or snapped or decided in an instant that her future would not exist. She was not a victim of circumstance. She was the victim of a human being, one who still walks free. Until the day someone speaks, until a print matches, until a body is found, the mystery remains open. But silence is not infinite. The truth has a way of clawing out of the dark. And when it does, when the final secret is revealed, it will not only expose Jodie's killer, but also every second of horror she endured on that June morning in 1995. That is the shadow Mason City lives with. That is the shadow her family carries. And that is the shadow you cannot shake after hearing her story. Because when the screen goes dark and the morning news plays on tomorrow, the question will linger in the air like a breath you can't quite exhale. Who took Jodi Huisentruit? And how much longer will they remain free? Don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and turn on the notification bell, so you stay updated with mystery stories that strike a chord. Thanks for watching.